Penguin Random House Audio presents All That Life Can Afford by Emily Everett. Read for you by Alex Finke.
For my mother, with me on all of my travels.
When a man is tired of London, he is tired of life, for there is in London all that life can afford. Samuel Johnson. Prologue. It was almost midnight. The water of the bay unfurled darkly far below, shimmering with white lights, each one a boat or yacht. It was achingly beautiful. By the time the countdown started, 10, 9, 8, the party's excitement was building around me, and then building inside me. 7, 6, 5, and I let myself rise up on those euphoric waves. I didn't have to worry about Callum. I didn't have to worry about anything. 4, 3, 2. I only had to stand here on the edge of the world, smiling like a fool, and count down to 0. The sky exploded with light. Fireworks, but they weren't coming from the hillside. They weren't coming from land at all. My eyes found it. A barge, out in the Mediterranean, lit now with tiny flashes that arched skyward, spun, grew dizzy, then heaved their sparkling guts to spatter the black sky. I swayed, tipping back to take them in. All the surrounding hills must be like our hill, crowded with tipsy revelers at grand villas, retinas burning like they'd looked into the sun. And I was one of them. Chapter 1. London, October 2009. I'd never been a great actor or a convincing liar, and an American in Britain will always be scrutinized. I prayed the ticket inspector might think I was an idiot, like all Americans, and not a crook, like most of the people he found on the train to Brighton without a ticket to cover their fare. Instructors like me had to pay for our own tickets when we traveled to teach weekly SAT prep sessions at posh boarding schools around the English countryside. Not that you'd know they were schools, more like mansions, refurbed monasteries, drafty Hogwarts-type castles. I'd seen a few already in the 4 months I'd worked for Kramer Test Prep, but this was the first time I hadn't had the money for my train ticket. I'd formed a weak plan on my way to the station. A shite plan, my flatmate Andre would have said. My first plan had been to borrow the money from him, but he hadn't come home last night. I'd been poor all my life, in a mundane, lower working class way. Food stamps, hand-me-downs, pancakes for dinner, and it had bred in me a scrappy sort of boldness that only backfired about 50% of the time. Sometimes it seemed like that scrappiness was the only thing I still shared with my father. The plan was a big risk, but I'd be fired if I missed my class. The travel bonus was £40 each trip. That alone made a typical 10-week class worth more than half a month's rent to me. I'd emailed my supervisor the second the Brighton class was posted, terrified that someone would scoop it up before me. I needed that bonus, even if it only came at the end of the whole class, months later. Months of Saturdays spent on long train rides, cursing everything. The city of Brighton, its icy coastal winds, its historic clifftop boarding school for girls, which I had never heard of, but which, when mentioned, impressed my British acquaintances so much. You teach at Rodin? That I'd quickly learned to use as social currency. But it was actual currency I needed, and so far I hadn't seen a pound for my Rodin SAT class. The shite plan was not complicated. For the first 45 minutes on the swaying southbound train, I only had to pretend to sleep. No easy task, my body thrumming with nervous energy. Fare dodging was no joke here. I'd once seen a ticket inspector rap his knuckles loudly on a train window for 10 minutes trying to wake a sleeping man, certainly ticketless. The man later hid in the bathroom, and 2 stations later the ticket inspector walked him off the train to a waiting semicircle of British transport police. Here, on an easily revoked student visa, I feared even the slightest brush with the law. The visa was my ticking clock. I had a year, essentially, to create a solvent, stable life. By this time next year, if I wanted to stay in London, I'd need a completed master's degree, which would earn me a 2-year post-study work visa. Then I could really begin to make my way in this place that felt more like home than home had in a long time. On good days, I believed it was possible. I could walk through London, my city, and feel that I had achieved something great just by being there. Here I was, taking the tube, rising on an escalator, emerging on the South Bank, strolling along the Thames and snapping photos and stopping on benches to read my book whenever the sun came out. But then I'd be sitting there, the breeze flipping the pages of my book, not reading, but wondering if I had enough to buy a panini and a tea at the little cafe tucked into the bridge arches near Waterloo. Some days I did have enough, and it was a perfect day. A day I could make a Polaroid snapshot in my mind and store as evidence that I'd made the right choice in coming here. And on days when I didn't have enough, and I went back to the flat and ate spaghetti with butter and stale Parmesan shaken from a can, it was still a perfectly good day for a broke grad student, getting by, not asking for help from my father or anyone. Finally, I heard the ticket inspector coming down the carriage, pausing at each seat. I kept my head against the window, eyes closed, hands folded in my lap, my teaching textbook open on the tray table. I felt a blush rising and willed it away. "Ticket, miss?" the inspector said, standing over me. He had lowered his voice slightly, perhaps trying not to startle me awake, and the possibility of this, his kindness, filled me simultaneously with hope and self-loathing. I let my eyes flutter open. "Oh, yes, I've got it here," I said, a bit breathless, reaching into both pockets to search for it, and then, with an apologetic smile, rummaging through my book bag as well. My stomach was churning. I'd come to London to leave this feeling behind. I didn't like what it said about me, that I was still scraping together the same threadbare life I'd had back home, that I was capable of this deception. Morally and literally bankrupt. Today would be the last time, I decided. Finally, I handed the inspector the ticket I'd purchased with my last pounds at Victoria Station. With one hand, he held the ticket, and with the other, he brought out his hole puncher to mark it spent. I did not breathe. Maybe he wouldn't look. Maybe he'd punch it, hand it back, and walk away, and I would be free. "This ticket's for Haywards Heath." My stomach dropped, and I felt the first beads of sweat form on my spine. I would have to do the full show then. I summoned a smile. "Yes, that's right." "You need a ticket to Brighton, miss." "Oh, why?" I said, leaning on my American accent. "I'm only going as far as Haywards Heath." The inspector looked away up the carriage, then back at me. "That was 2 stops ago. We're nearly to Brighton now." "What?" I said, and made to stand, bumping into the tray table, tipping my textbook off and onto the floor, where notes and marked tests sprayed from its pages. The inspector bent for the book while I made a show of struggling to close the tray table. "I've missed my stop?" I asked, letting in a small note of hysteria. "She was sleeping the whole time, poor dear," the woman across the aisle said, unfurling a deeply posh accent. She handed some of my papers back. The inspector nodded deferentially to the woman but continued to reach for his radio. "There are protocols for this kind of thing," he said to me. "You'll have to pay at the next station. I have to report it." Panic surged up my spine. "Oh, I knew this would happen," I interrupted. "I should have just gone straight to the school." The inspector glanced at my textbook, still in his hand. The kindness had gone from his face. He was...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?